Hey everyone, welcome to Show Me the Meaning, Wisecrack's movie podcast.
Show me the meaning!
My name is Jared, and as you probably noticed, it's Austin doing the Show Me the Meaning shout this time. Unfortunately, because Ryan is in Tennessee at his grandma's funeral, unfortunately. So if you guys follow Ryan on Twitter or anything, give him a little love, because it's never a fun thing. But anyway, my name is Jared, and I'm joined here by some of the Show Me the Meaning crew. You got Austin.
Hello.
And Claire is back with us.
Hi.
And today we've got a special guest, one of the hosts of the Mad About Movies podcast, Kent Garrison. How are you, Kent?
Hey, good to be here, guys. Doing great.
Awesome. Thank you for joining us. So today we're going to be breaking down the 1996 film Fargo, written and or whatever, directed by Joel and Ethan Coen, starring Frances McDormand and William H. Macy. So let's go ahead and, as always, get some first impressions. Let's start with Claire, since she hasn't been on the podcast for so long. So Claire, first time you've seen the movie, and what's it like revisiting it?
No, this was my first time seeing the movie, and I watched it this morning so that it was especially fresh. I feel like I'm going to get a lot of hate for this, but I didn't love it.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Thank God, because I was the hater last podcast, so it's good that we have a new, fresh hater.
That was Cabin in the Woods, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, I won't let you live that down. No, it was weird because I've enjoyed every Coen Brothers movie I've ever seen before. And I was like, oh yeah, Burn After Reading. And this has Frances McDormand. And this is going to be like The Big Lebowski, but without the white Russians. Like, this is going to be great. And I don't know. I felt like the Coen Brothers always kind of like smash you over the head with their themes. But I don't know. I didn't get a lot out of it.
Okay. Yeah, I'm really excited to talk about it further. Austin, what about you?
Yeah, I love this movie so much. It was my foray into Coen Brothers. Actually, that's a lie. I saw Raising Arizona when I was a kid, but I didn't really appreciate it. But so in my actual like autonomous subjective years, this was my foray into Coen Brothers. I think it's amazing. And then last night, as I was watching it again, it was just resonating with all kinds of different strange existential themes that I'm sure that we'll be able to delve into. And then I was also seeing a lot of resonance with films, which I kind of boiled down in my mind to the awkwardness of money. So we can talk about that, I'm sure.
Ooh, fun.
Love this movie. Love Steve Buscemi. Love William H. Macy. I love the Coen Brothers.
Awesome. What about you, Kent?
Yeah, this is an interesting one because just so happens to be the movie that you guys picked to have me on is my number one of all time.
Woo! Damn, I feel lucky. Huge
Fargo guy. Revisit this one often, multiple times a year sometimes. Revisit it again this week for the show. I never really seem to get tired of it. I want to, but every time I put it on, I find something new to like about it. I find some kind of theme like you were talking about, Austin, every single time that I didn't quite catch the last time. There's just something extremely simple about the film that I like. It's not overdone. It's not really full of itself. It's just chronological story, a very simple one at that, and a good setup, and memorable, interesting characters. And it's just something in a movie that I really never want to get rid of in my collection. I always try to downsize my Blu-ray collection every year, but it's always the one that's always number one there in the collection. So it's been great also how they spun it off into a TV series, and that's another part of this conversation maybe. But it's been a really fun property to follow, and the way they've spun it off has been really interesting as well. So big Fargo fan over here.
And the fact that the TV show is as good as it is amazing. I mean, when I heard they were making a TV show based off this movie, I'm like, okay, well, that's impossible to make good. I mean, you can't replicate the Coen Brothers charm, but I guess I'm the asshole.
Yeah, it's the TV show, in my opinion, has done nothing but make the movie even better. It hasn't done anything to ruin the reputation of the movie. It's just enhanced the world building that the Coen Brothers did in 96. So this is it's a property that I hope continues. I mean, it feels like they can do 7 or 8 of these seasons of Fargo. So excited to see where it goes.
All right. So car salesman Jerry Lundegaard has precious little time before his money problems catch up with him. So he hires 2 men named Carl and, I'm going to fuck this up, Gayer, to kidnap his wife in order to acquire a ransom from his wealthy father-in-law. After an irritating ride to Brainerd, Carl and Gayer clumsily kidnap Jerry's wife. Later, they get pulled over, and Carl's blunders force Gayer to kill the policeman and 2 others. Pregnant officer Marge Gunderson takes the murder case and tracks Carl and Gayer to the Twin Cities. Meanwhile, Jerry has a hard time convincing his father-in-law to pay the full ransom and eventually insists that he deliver the money. Marge's investigation leads her to Jerry's dealership, but Jerry dodges her questions, while Carl and Gayer make it to the hideout cabin with Jerry's wife. Jerry's father-in-law goes to meet Carl at the drop point. Carl shoots and kills him, but not before he nicks Carl in the face. Carl takes their share and buries the rest of the money. It's only after having an awkward run-in with an old classmate that Marge suspects that Jerry might not have been forthright with her questions. When she confronts him a second time, Jerry blows the interview and flees the scene. Carl returns to the getaway house to find Jerry's wife dead, splits the money with Gayer, but a disagreement over what to do with the Sierra compels Gayer to kill Carl with an axe and put his body through a wood chipper. While patrolling, Marge spots Carl and Gayer's car and shoots Gayer as he flees from the wood chipper. The cops arrest Jerry, and Marge goes to bed with her husband, who announces that his painting of a duck will now be on the 3-cent stamp. The two of them embrace as they look forward to the birth of their baby. End of movie. You know, I just realized I didn't even say what I thought about this movie, so if I can just get that real quick. I love this movie. I love this movie so much. Even it's been a while since I've seen it. I can't remember the first time I seen it. It was probably very early high school for me. I remember the first time I saw it, I probably didn't kind of pick up on the comedy as much as I did in later viewings. But last night when I put this movie on, even the first scene when Jerry Lundegaard meets Carl and Gayer, I was like, fuck yeah, I'm so glad I'm watching this right now. This is going to be captivating from beginning to end. So anyway, that's what I think about the movie. So there's a lot of things to talk about here. But the first thing I want to talk about is the element that seems to, I don't know if I want to say it's the most lasting thing, but it's definitely something that people talk about a lot, and that is the intro title screen. The thing that says, "This is a true story. The events depicted in this film took place in Minnesota in 1987. At the request of the survivors, the names have been changed. Out of respect for the dead, the rest has been told exactly as it occurred." So, Claire, did you know, since it's your first time watching the movie, what did you think when you saw that?
So I did look it up afterwards and saw that, you know, that was all fabricated.
Right.
But when I was watching it, I saw that at the beginning, and my kind of initial reaction was like, okay, I don't care unless it's something that's really shocking if it's real. By the end, I'd kind of forgotten about it. And my ultimate reaction to that is that it doesn't matter if it really happened or not, which maybe it's what they were going for. I see how it could be an interesting either commentary if we want to take it in a deep way, or marketing tactic if we don't. But yeah, it didn't really strike much of a chord with me either way.
But did it inform the way you were watching the movie on that initial viewing? And then
not even a little bit.
Really?
Nope, not even 1%. Nope.
What about you guys, Kent and Austin? The first time you watched the movie, what did you think about that? And did it frame the way that you're experiencing the movie? And when you learned it was bullshit, how did that change it?
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know if I took it serious the first time. I don't even think if it was a conscious thing that it even occurred to me. I just thought I've seen so many movies before that take liberties based on a true story that I didn't care how real or accurate it was. I don't know if it framed my mind at all, but I just love the fact that they can take something that the film industry thinks is a convention, where based on a true story, it has to be true. And I remember there's a story William H. Macy was talking about, talking with the Coens about the based on a true story thing. Like, he didn't know, halfway through the movie that this wasn't actually a true story. And he's like, but you can't do that. You can't, it says here in the front of the script, you can't do that. And they're like, why not? And he's like, I guess that's true. So I just like that they just took something that was, brainwashes the viewer into thinking it's true, and just threw that in there to add credibility to it. But I think this story could be true. I mean, this probably happened, right?
Well, that's the interesting. That is the interesting thing. How we say that, this versus Burn After Reading or any other Coen Brothers movie seems more quote unquote real, which I think is interesting. But I want to hear Austin's thought on this.
Yeah, I mean, I just don't understand the fascination with wanting to see real stories anyway. I mean, I think that when people try to analyze the historical accuracy of a movie, or they try to see whether or not it fits with the characteristics of a real biographical person, I just don't have any interest in any of that level of analysis. To me, that's boring. That's not what film does. That's not what cinema can do. That's not what art does. So I just don't even care about that level at all. I just watch it as a piece of art.
Right, but I mean, okay, so I guess I would argue that if you're looking at a painting, the frame of the painting will still inform the way that you consume the art. So I think that this is important, and it is going to frame the way that you consume it in some way or another.
Did you ever see the documentary F for Fake? Well, is it a
Hell yeah.
documentary?
It's more of a I don't know. But yeah, Orson Welles, it's fucking ace.
That F for Fake was amazing. It was, the kind of the artist as a magician. Others here are kind of playing with, and to me, so it doesn't really affect me because I'm really aware that the historical basis or based on a true story stuff is all bullshit.
Okay, I mean that's fair enough. I mean, no one seems to be too interested in this. I find it particularly interesting, and I think I find it interesting.
Why? Why? How does it? Is there like a juxtaposition that somehow it affects your viewing of the film?
Well, this coupled with the overall style of the movie, I think if you were to I think this is a very complex movie in the way that it's structured and a lot of the things, but I think probably the most accurate way I can describe it as kind of docu-noir. Docu-noir was a late 40s style of noir that would use voiceover narration and were based on news stories and used styles associated with newsreels. And back then in the 40s, when you use that style associated with newsreels, it does give that elevated sense of reality. And even this movie has very natural lighting with very little camera movement. And I do think that this movie is trying to, maybe it's part of its kind of, and we'll talk about this next, but it's more kind of like salt of the earth message of kind of affirming that, almost like comically quaint salt of the earth lifestyle as we see through Marge Gunderson and her husband. And maybe it's just kind of in service of that. But I think that whether or not it affects you and I do think that if someone is told what you're about to see is a real story, they are going to consume it differently than if we don't see that. And I guess, I see where you're coming from, Austin. Like, ultimately, it doesn't matter. It's just what is the story. But I think it's just almost too interesting to ignore the fact that they took a bullshit story and said, you know what, I think it would somehow elevate the piece if we told people that it was true beforehand, even though it's bullshit.
Yeah.
So I might be going out on a limb here, but maybe the reason that it was more resonant in 1996 than it is now, at least I'm just drawing from the lack of resonance with me and maybe some of the other people who are watching, is I think people are much more wary of things presented to them as true stories in the news or in anything now. There's I'm trying to stay away from the term fake news, but people are wary even when they think that they are being presented with something real. So that, given in the context of something that is a theatrical film, I think, at least for me, I'm just too jaded. Even if it were presented to me as a news story, I don't know if I would necessarily believe that it was real. So especially not coming from the Coen brothers.
And this is before reality television was the thing that it is now. And I'm not making this claim, but you could argue that this is kind of like the birth of reality television, where we sell something as real, but it's highly curated.
Yeah, I think that's a great connection.
Yeah. I just wanted to bring up one fun piece of trivia, is that because of this title screen that we're talking about, when the movie came out, people actually searched the roads of North Dakota for the windshield scraper that marked the location of the $1 million. And I find that to be pretty awesome piece of trivia.
You're shitting me. That didn't actually happen.
Yes, it did. I mean, because back in 1996, you would probably just assume that if they're saying it's based on a true story, then perhaps there's some sort of legality, then it can't not be true, right?
Well, wouldn't they assume that when they were filming it, that the people who were filming it and had researched it would have, maybe tried to find the money?
I just don't think most people don't conceive the idea of like production or of filming and stuff like that.
I thought this was a documentary. This
whole
thing was real. There's
real
footage of that would actually...
Well, that's also more to my point about the docu-noir, is that, and I think that it almost seduces people into thinking of it as reality. The one thing, I don't want to dwell on this too long. The last thing I want to say is that this title screen about it being a true story, that frames every episode of the TV show. Do any of you guys watch the TV show?
I watched the first 2 seasons.
Yeah. Why do you think that that of all things they carry that over?
And it frames the sort of awkwardness of the story.
Yeah, it's an extremely... I've always thought of Fargo as an extremely suburban property. To me, what it kind of intros to me is like these stories are basically just Dateline NBC like murder porn stories, right? They're stylized cinematic versions of that. So really that's like just setting up the story so you assume it's real, but you don't necessarily care because it's entertaining. So maybe they just were looking for ways to connect the movie and the TV show, so they added the title card. I don't know. I can't explain it, but but it doesn't really affect how much I like it.
Genius.
Yeah, I mean, if this movie had been awful, if Fargo had been a bad movie, I don't necessarily think that would have affected my viewing of it. I still think it's good, and I don't think it affects my overall perception of the film, if that makes sense.
Was Fargo before or after the found footage of the Blair Witch Project?
It was before.
Before.
Okay.
But that's an interesting point, Claire.
Yeah, I'm not sure there was a point there. I was just wondering because when we talk about that being the beginning of people, being willing to believe something like that, I'm thinking about all of the hype around the Blair Witch Project and people, freaking out over these deaths of these, people who were actually killed. And so if there was a big gap in the time between Fargo and the Blair Witch Project, I imagine that was a very stressful time for theater goers.
Yeah. So I guess my next question, I think this is more to what Austin was saying. I'm curious, what do you guys think the moral message of this film is?
The moral message?
Or just the message in general. What is this movie about?
I've always thought the movie should end. There's like the one complaint that I might have with this film, the spoiler alert coming right now for a movie over 20 years old. So hopefully people have seen it who are listening to this. But I've always thought the film should end where she's in the scene with Storm Ayer's character, or Frances McDormand is in the car driving him away after arresting him, and says, "There's more to life than money, Don't you know that?" I've always thought that should be where credits roll, like right then. And it kind of has a little epilogue where you see what happens to Jerry, and you see she sits in the bed with her husband, and he gets the stamp and all that. But I've always thought that was kind of ancillary to the actual ending of the story, other than finding out what happens to Jerry AKA the guy who's responsible for all this stuff. But I've always thought it was that there's more to life than money or anything like that. That's always Jerry's thing. Like, he cared more about money than he did his own family, than his own son, than his own wife, than his own, in-laws or whatever, his own job or well-being. So that's always been what I took of it. That and just, empowering an awesome female, and Frances McDormand, a pregnant cop lady, like that's the original Wonder Woman right there. Like, that's Gal Gadot 20 years ago. So there's a lot you can kind of read into there, but that's kind of what I've read over it over the past few years has gotten from it.
I thought that the last scene, the way they filmed it, was actually really consistent with the way that the rest of the story is laid out. Because for me, the way that they're telling it, and I think that this is, partially epitomized in the fact that the movie is called Fargo, and only the very first scene takes place in Fargo. The story isn't actually about Fargo in the same way that the story isn't really actually about any of these things, the quote unquote real events. It's not about the murder. It's not about the kidnapping. We don't even see most of the kidnapping. We barely see Jean's face. So I feel like the movie is in many ways about the little pieces that happen in between, the things that make it seem more real. And so ending on the note of Frances McDormand in bed with her husband talking about the stamp, that's what matters. The stamp matters. The guy with the wood chipper, that was kind of, that was a day on the job. It was a stressful part, but that wasn't what mattered to her or to their story.
Yeah, exactly. It's her trying to convince to him that there's other things going on that are more important, and that's 100% right.
the theme, I think, is that there's this juxtaposition between the sincerity of Frances McDormand's character, who's about to bring life into the world, right? She's pregnant, and she has her salt of the earth kind of family with her husband, and she's 100% sincere. There's no postmodern cynicism I don't think, in any of the Coen Brothers films. Actually, I think that they fit within that new sincerity school, right? That we have identified in various other videos and things like that, and that you find like David Foster Wallace is oftentimes lumped into as a novelist. And what I mean by that is that there's not an ounce of distance in Frances McDormand at all. Like, she really is proud of her husband for the 3-cent victory, or the 3-cent stamp victory, and she really is confused as to why this world that it should be more about money is oftentimes not about money. And so what you get is this awkward juxtaposition between her sincerity and all the dark violence and awkwardness that the rest of the film puts on display with all these other characters. And that's what I think the real theme is kind of sincerity and hope, on the verge of someone who's about to bring life into the world, the idea of money creating awkwardness, and then these other elements of awkwardness as well that I think they're. Oh, there's a car horn outside. That one's going to be tough to edit out, isn't it, Blake? But that there are these 3 levels of awkwardness that I think that are really on display in this film. And I think that's kind of the moral, if you can take away from the movie.
So I want to go more into this idea of awkwardness. But first, I agree with you. I guess my question is, and I actually went back and read some reviews about this movie. And one review from the Los Angeles Times said that this film was swathed in a call of superiority to its characters. And then another review in the Village Voice said that it set up their characters as objects of ridicule. And I think that they're probably drawing from, when Frances McDormand, even though she's extremely kind, extremely earnest, extremely authentic, there are parts in which the actual film itself perhaps complicates or trivializes that. Like when she goes to the buffet, she is putting the grossest food onto her plate, just heaping it up. There's like this deliberate specificity where her and her husband are eating Arby's. Like, oh, you got Arby's all over me, hon.
Right.
And I'm most curious to hear what Claire thinks, since it's her first time watching it. And then also when we bring into this whole thing with the title screen being a big troll, like, does this give a sense of detachment? It kind of makes me slightly question that the whole film asserting the kind of comically quaint salt of the earth affirmation of life might be just kind of like a practical joke.
Well, I think they're definitely,
because that's their hometown.
Sure.
So they're being self-critical, but I think there's a real sincerity and they're kind of like joking with each other, right? Like you can imagine them sitting there writing and be like, oh my God, that's like our neighbor Bob, or that's like our neighbor Nancy, right? And I don't think that there's necessarily like a cynical distancing. I think it's a really sincere love story, but done through a sort of weird, awkward, kind of Jewish, Schlemelian kind of tale, like all of their films.
Is Schlemelian a real word? I mean,
I just made it.
I know Schlemiel, but I love Schlemelian. I love Schlemelian.
So it's got to be real, right?
Yeah.
Oh, I think it makes a big difference that the Coen brothers are from Minnesota, because if they weren't, it could really look like they were shitting on Midwesterners for the buffets and the, they didn't have a casserole in there, but they might as well have. But the fact that really is their hometown, I think that does play to the idea that there's something very sincere about it. But I'm so glad that you brought up Marge's sincerity, because that's one of the things that bothered me the most about the film, was Marge. I like her. I mean, it's impossible not to like her, right? And that's the problem. I always am suspicious of a film that has a lead character who doesn't have any visible character flaws. Somebody who's kind of too perfect and they're pushing you to like too much. And so it just it gave me kind of this like suspicion about the film that made it harder for me to connect to it, was the fact that Marge really didn't have any character flaws.
I mean, do you not think that social nicety could be conceived as a flaw?
they weren't painting it as one. Her niceness was coupled with her being the most effective person. I mean, the whole movie is filled with people who are drastically incompetent, and she's one of the few very competent people. And part of the way that she is competent is through that Minnesota nice. She is able to, conduct really smart, like effective police interviews. She's able to, assert herself in uncomfortable positions, like with that guy at the restaurant. And she does it all while being really nice. So I don't ever see a place where her niceness detracts from her ability to be an effective cop. If anything, it only really adds to it, which isn't a bad thing in itself. It's just another way that she's not ever flawed.
Except for when she just takes Lundegaard's lie at face value, when he says, no car has been stolen from the lot, so she just leaves. And it isn't until she learns about deception, that she's been lied to before, that she starts to see the cracks in the world.
So she's too naive is her flaw.
She's too naive, yeah. And then her naivete gets awakened a little when she's in the car saying, like, there's more to the world than money. And I think that's that moment when she has that self-revelation. Writers... John Truby's a script doctor who talks about that there are these like 7 points that every successful script has to have. And the seventh one is that the protagonist has to come to a point of self-revelation where they have to realize that the world that they're in they can no longer live in the same way that they did before because they've changed. They've had a realization, right? And I think that's her verbalizing her realization, even though prior to that, we've seen her act on the realization, which is when she makes the decision to go in and confront him. And because she realizes that people lie and people are dishonest. So maybe, I see what you're saying, but I'm probably giving the Coen brothers too much credit because I'm such a fanboy and because I know that, they studied philosophy. So I'm like, clearly they're so much smarter. There's something going on. So maybe I'm giving them too much credit, but I wonder if that kind of, it's there just very subtly.
I mean, if we were just to take the film at, face value, which I don't even know what that means, but if we were to read the film, I guess, in a certain very straightforward way, I think I might agree that there's this, naivety that shifts when she realizes that the guy lied to her about this dead wife. And so, that triggers her realizing that Jerry is lying. But I find it really hard to believe that the chief of police, even in a small town, is going to be somebody who's naive. She looks at a few dead bodies on the snow, like pretty gruesome dead bodies, when she arrives on the scene, and she's totally unfazed. She might puke, but it's only because of morning sickness. Everything about her character speaks to her not being particularly naive. So then when we get her in this situation where we're supposed to believe that she is naive, I'm not buying it.
So I don't know whether to read that as naivete or just so much of the film's comedy, and I just feel like the overall aesthetic of the film is this idea of kindness covering up darkness. One of my favorite examples of this and how it manifests in the comedy is, so Jerry is trying to console his son after his wife is kidnapped, and he's in his son's room, and then he very falsely gives him a sense of comfort, and then he closes the door, and then there's a poster on the back of the door of a guy playing accordion in lederhosen, and the camera lingers on this absurd image for a second. And I don't know, did you guys, I always laugh at that part. It's so small, but I think it's more of this culture of nicety that covers up this real fucked up nature underneath the surface.
Yeah, I really take a lot from the quote-unquote Minnesota nice that the Coen brothers, emphasize here. They talk a lot about, growing up there and wanting the people that weren't familiar with that culture to know what it's about. And I think if they didn't have that root there, that this could have been an extremely insincere film, and it would have come off as fake and lame, but it comes off as so realistic that it's almost is like a documentary. But you talked about the covering up the dark, and one of the scenes that defines that for me is Jerry in the diner with his father-in-law and I guess their friend, and they're talking about whether they should pay up or not. And Jerry, the entire time, William H. Macy plays that up so perfectly, where he's sitting there and he's nervous and he's looking at his food, and he's like, we should just pay up. We don't want to mess around with these guys. Oh, we should call the cops. We don't want to call the cops. And he has this really dark conversation where he's basically telling his family that he's not behind it, that he knows doesn't know what's going on, and then they're all leaving angrily, and he walks up to the counter and they're like, how's it going there? He's like, oh yeah, real good now. And it's just like immediately the Minnesota Nice kicks in and the world is fine. Everybody's in this weird kind of on cloud nine all the time up there or something. They don't really come down to earth at all. And so that's obviously shown several times throughout the film. But I love that. It's like Canadians in South Park, how they're always like, I'm sorry, and they're always apologizing, and there's just like this almost a caricature.
Yeah.
But like Claire said, they can get away with it, the fact that they grew up there.
So I want to talk about one of the oddest things about the film, and that is the structure of this movie. How many movies have you seen where we don't meet our protagonist until 35 minutes into the movie?
Yeah. Interesting, right? I wasn't super sensitive to it until last night, where I was like, oh fuck, I forgot that it took so long for us to meet Frances McDormand.
Yeah. I don't really think I can think of another movie like this. And so my question to you guys is, up until that point, who are we rooting for? Or actually, who are we rooting for throughout the whole movie? Is it as simple as we're just invested in this disturbing scenario until we meet Frances McDormand and then we're on board with her? Is it that simple? How did you guys react to that?
I think maybe that was one of the problems for me, is because I started out not having anyone to root for, and I wasn't sold when they gave me Marge to root for, so I never had anyone to root for. And that's not necessarily a fatal flaw in the movie. There's a lot of really good films that don't ever give you anyone to root for, but that's maybe one of the reasons that I found it hard to get attached. So I'm really glad you brought that up.
Yeah, I think they set it up so that you think you're supposed to root for William H. Macy's character, Lundegaard, right? And you're like, oh fuck, he's embroiled in this financial thing and he's coming up with a plot, but hopefully his wife doesn't get hurt and hopefully it's okay. But then you're kind of like, oh man, he's kind of an asshole that he's orchestrating this whole thing and having his wife kidnapped just so he can get out of his financial troubles. But maybe you're rooting for him, but you start to realize that like there are no redeeming qualities about his mission that would elicit any sort of allegiance from the audience. And so there is this, again, I keep using this word awkwardness, but I think that this film is really characterized by this awkwardness. And if there is a tension that it creates in the audience, I think it is that awkward discomfort. And then when she comes in, there's a little bit of an alleviation of that awkwardness, because they're at least trying to, whether successfully or not. Obviously Claire doesn't think is quite as successful, but I think at least what they're trying to do is then give you the sort of alleviation of the awkward that allows you to then have a typical protagonist. And I think it does start off, it's like a bait and switch in a way.
Right.
So Austin, I'd like you to say a little bit more on the awkwardness. You've mentioned a few times that for you is one of the kind of biggest thematic underpinnings of the movie. But could you clarify a little bit what you mean by this awkwardness?
Yeah, so a lot of people think the Coen brothers are absurd, right? And, a lot of people talk about Albert Camus or Martin Heidegger and existentialism when they're talking about the Coen brothers. And so I actually think that I would depart from that just a little bit. It's more just a modification. It flows out of anxiety or out of the boredom that you find in the writings of Heidegger. And I was from a young philosopher by the name of Adam Kotsko, written a trilogy of books on these weird social. One was called Awkwardness. The second one was called Why We Love Sociopaths, or maybe that was the third one. And then the third one was called Creepiness, or the second one was called Creepiness. But either way, about sociopaths, and one's about creepiness. And he basically identifies that there is this shift towards the awkward. We're living in an age of awkwardness, and he identifies it as taking place initially in the 70s, and that's why you see the emergence of the Woody Allen Schlemiel character. And he says it's because there was a cultural cause that people really had a passion for anymore after the sort of political revolutions of the 60s. It sort of started to die down a little bit in the 70s. And then in the 80s, there was like this, that sort of overcame the awkwardness, but then it came back again full of these signals. The show Seinfeld, David, again, with this sort of characters as being this mark of 90s awkwardness. And then, of course, he talks about Curb Your Enthusiasm and things like that later on as well. But I think that the Coen brothers really bathe in this awkwardness, and I think they do it at 3 levels in this film in particular. And I kind of wrote them down. One I said is social awkwardness. One is the awkwardness of money, and then one, Jared, we might call the meta awkward. And so the social awkwardness is at the level of plot, right? And it's when social norms are confounded, or when social norms are complicated. So like you have these prostitutes that are sitting there talking with this police officer, and I love that scene so much because the awkwardness is palpable, right? Like the police officer, she's clearly trying to be not her information, but they're just kind of sitting there, like nodding their head. Yeah, that's what happened, And she's kind of like, okay, so what did the guy look like? He's funny, and he's just kind of funny looking. Weird awkwardness that at the level of plot that we're seeing, because she doesn't want to be too intrusive, she doesn't want to be too pushy, but nevertheless she's also trying to get her information. So there's that tension because of these norms, these worlds that sort of don't fit together. So it's people basically trying to maintain the social niceties in the face of their actual breakdown. And then the second one is the awkwardness. Money creates strained social relations. I think we kind of already touched on that. That's through so many of the Coen brothers films, the way they use money to create awkwardness. You see it in Big Lebowski, you see it in No Country for Old Men. And then I think the third level is what I call the meta awkward. And then that is where the audience then feels awkward in the face of the awkwardness that we're seeing on screen. And then maybe in 2 ways, at least, that I could just think of offhand. And one is that we recognize the awkwardness at the level of the plot, and that causes the humor because it creates these weird juxtapositions. And then it elicits a feeling of awkwardness in light of this Midwestern niceness. And so I think that what's taking place is that they're actually displaying the Midwestern niceness. And we look at this in a post-cynical world and we say, Jesus, that's weird and uncomfortable. Why are they talking and bumbling and fumbling over their sentences? Why can't they just say what they want? Why don't they just ask what they want? Why don't they realize that that person's lying? Obviously, that person's being deceitful. And so I think those are the sort of 3 levels of awkwardness. And I think Kotsko's book really kind of gives a nice philosophical and sociological underpinning to this age of awkwardness that I think people should check out. It's a short little read. It's just a little essay, and you can find it online. And I think it's like just a couple bucks.
The thing you mentioned about the 2 women that Carl and Gare sleep with, and then they're interviewed by Marge Gunderson. I think that scene is one of the ones that you can point to and say that these critics might have a point in that. Because what's the difference between them and Marge Gunderson? Like, one of them is certainly lampooned. Like, we're getting a caricature of this Minnesota nice that also kind of equals Minnesota dumb. So I can definitely see how these reviewers might have said that they're setting up all these characters as objects of ridicule. And
but every Coen Brothers film does that. Like, literally, the culmination is A Serious Man.
So,
right?
Yes, and I love A Serious Man, but that movie is definitely more nihilistic than it. And the reason why I'm bringing this up is back to my point of what's the moral message of the movie. If the message is, that money isn't what matters, we ought not put the things that matter in our life at risk for the sake of money, then is that just a joke? Like, is that half serious?
Maybe. Yeah, I feel like everything with the Coen brothers is half serious.
Right. But yet it
also,
seems
why
like...
do you think they're prostitutes? Sorry, maybe we can come back to that.
I guess because he says, "Hey, I know a place where we can get laid." So I'm
and then later
maybe he knows the women, but and then he does bring a woman who says like, "How long have you been working with the escort service?"
But that's a different woman.
I know, but I just presumed that it was a pattern of behavior, that he kind of had the spots, that's what he did, they might not be. But I presumed it based on kind of some of the other bits.
Before they met the other 2 women, he did say, "Hey, I know a place where we can get laid." I guess that's why.
That doesn't mean...
no, it's an assumption, but...
Yeah. But I didn't think it at first, but then when he's with the escort later, then I was like, oh, okay, that's what he does. He visits escorts. Okay.
Right. I'm kind of in the middle between both Austin and Claire here because last night I found myself asking, who am I rooting for? Because more to Claire's point, like, I don't think that Marge Gunderson is such a identifiable character that as soon as she's on screen, I'm like, okay, I want her to win. I want her to catch Jerry. I didn't really feel very strongly about that. And I kept on asking myself, what do I want to happen? And on one level, I really think that we're just watching this event tragically unravel, and we're seeing everyone's getting the comeuppance for their greed or their sins. But at least in my opinion, I'm curious what you guys think about this. I think that on one level, we're rooting for Jerry in the sense that we want this whole thing just to go over smoothly and for nobody to get hurt.
Exactly. Yeah, because we're sociopaths.
Right.
We're the sociopaths.
Right.
It's framed in a way before we're introed to Marge that the protagonist is Jerry, but what we want to happen is for all this, like you said, for him to confess to everything, like, sorry, honey, sorry, everybody, this is a big misunderstanding, right? For him to be redeemed as a human being for doing this. It never happens, and you end up rooting for Marge, and she, solves everything. But it's set up as he's the protagonist that you're just waiting for that that moment where he's gonna realize he's in the wrong, and it never happens. But yeah.
See, I never, even for a second, identified or wanted to root for Jerry in any way. If anything, I was rooting for poor Jean. But I mean, maybe this was something we weren't supposed to think about, but I did think about, he's selling his wife out. He's getting her kidnapped, knowing full well that he doesn't know these people. She might get hurt. She might get killed. He's kidnapping and, being complicit in the abuse and eventually the death of his wife, which we can, if we're being realistic, kind of see coming a little bit. We at least know it's a possibility. So this is a guy who shows extreme coldness and towards his wife, towards this woman who is clearly pretty devoted to him from what we see in the first few scenes, and is like the mother of his child. And the fact that he is willing to pay someone to kidnap and hurt her makes me, just from second one, like I feel nothing for this guy. I hope he gets shot. He didn't get shot. That was too bad.
Yeah, so it's interesting because yes, everything he does is morally abhorrent, but I don't think that a character that does morally abhorrent things is what determines whether we root for them or not. So, the prime example is A Clockwork Orange. Like literally the first scene is Alex, beating up a homeless guy and then raping a woman. And yet he is still our anti-hero protagonist that we root for in some perverse way. And
I think it depends who's watching the film.
Of course, it always depends on who's watching the film.
I hate Alex in A Clockwork Orange, and I did from the beginning. I just cannot ever, even a little bit, sympathize with a character who perpetrates violence against women, especially rape. They are not an anti-hero for me. Like, I want them dead from second one.
Right.
Yeah, and that's exactly what Kubrick is exploring, is you're supposed to feel that way unless you're a sociopath. But is there a sense in which he manipulates the audience a little bit to even elicit just a tiny bit of, okay, this is the guy's story, let's see how it unfolds. Even that hope of let's see how it unfolds is a type of sympathy. And I think that's where that weird tension comes in. And again, to plug this guy's books, the second one or third one, whichever it is, where he says the book of Adam Kotsko, Why We Love Sociopaths. It's one of the things that he addresses as well that is related to the awkward, right? And he talks about Seinfeld, and in Seinfeld, you have all these characters who they live the awkward, but they don't really seem to be as affected by it, except for George Costanza. George is the one who goes fucking crazy. Kramer's always kind of cool somehow. Elaine is kind of cool. Jerry seems kind of cool. Yeah, he has moments of freak out, but really George is the one who can't deal with the awkward. And it's because, according to Kotsko, and then according to a lot of people's interpretation of Seinfeld, especially that last episode, that's because they're sociopaths. They don't actually recognize the norms of how people ought to behave. And so what Claire is kind of talking about is, you're absolutely right. You're not supposed to sympathize with these types of characters. But if there's even a moment where you're like, man, I wonder if he's going to get away, or I hope there's some sort of resolution or whatever. If there isn't just pure contempt for them throughout, saying, God, I'm just waiting for justice to smite them, then maybe that's where that weird tension comes in.
What about
I
you?
mean, I'm not saying you're wrong that that's what they're trying to do.
Yeah, you just don't like it.
Yeah,
I
Kent,
just
how
don't
did
like it.
yeah, Kent, how do you feel
that's
about?
because you're not a sociopath.
So I am a sociopath because I love the movie A Clockwork Orange.
At last we figured it out.
No, so what Kotsko even says is, he says all of us have a little bit of the creepy in us. All of us have a little bit of the awkwardness in us, and all of us have a little bit of that sociopathic tendency. It's not that we are, quote unquote, being in our nature, final designation, identified as sociopaths to court, even though some of these characters might be sociopaths to court, but that it elicits in us a sort of, that there's a commonality, that there's something sociopathic about the breakdown of those norms that kind of all of us can at least recognize and feel sometimes. And if we don't feel it sometimes, that maybe we should pay more attention to ourselves in those moments when we do elicit those sociopathic or creepy or awkward tendencies.
So Kent, I'm curious, what do you, when you ask yourself who am I rooting for in this movie, especially when it's your favorite movie, does it change once we're introduced to Marge? Does it not?
Yeah, I think it does. I think Marge is such a, like, she's almost a Mary Sue in a sense, or she's, like you said, Claire, the only flaw she really has is she almost pukes, but it's because she's pregnant and she's carrying a baby. You know what? She says 7 months pregnant in this movie.
Yeah, 2 more months, they say at the end.
And like, how much of an a-hole is that other cop, right? Like, she's gonna go check out the body while you stand by the car and like fill out the report, you know, the pregnant lady. So it's funny with that, but yeah, I don't know if it ever really changes. Like I said, I want Jerry to get his comeuppance and to, you know, turn around and become a good person, but it never really happens. And I like the fact that everybody kind of dies at the end. You know, like I said before, I think this is really just a commentary on how suburban culture really is, that weird crap like this happens all the time and it's on the news nightly and we don't really think about, oh, 2 people murdered, yeah, big deal, whatever, you know, and just another day. But it simultaneously helps you root for them and against them, but you at the end of the day realize like everybody's kind of got something to root against, if that makes sense. But yeah, I would say Marge is probably my, you know, the person I rooted for the entire time. It didn't really fluctuate.
Right. So I think what Kent is saying about this, coming away with the movie of thinking that this kind of things happen in suburban life all the time, really speaks more to the point I was trying to make about it as docu-noir, and how, whether it's that opening credits slide or the style of the film, there is something very deliberate here in trying to have the audience accept it as either reality or a reflection of reality. And I think that's particularly interesting. The next question I have, I don't know if this is actually answered. Maybe I just didn't get it. But do we ever know why Jerry needs the money specifically?
It was to do the parking lot, wasn't it? To open a parking lot business or something?
Well, I guess, how did he get... What happened? Like, why is he so in the hole with money? I know that obviously he's got the car thing with like those serial numbers.
Something with the GMAC, yeah.
Well, see, I think the way I interpreted that, and tell me if I'm wrong, is that he got into some money problems, so he got loans on cars that didn't exist to, you know, pay Peter. But we don't know what the initial thing of how he got into this hole was, do we?
I agree. I didn't notice it. If we didn't, Claire, I don't know. And again, you know, when you see a movie so many times, you maybe sometimes skip over things because you project onto it. So I'm curious, Claire, did you notice that?
No, and I noticed that I didn't notice that. I have written down, like, why does he need the money?
Yeah.
I mean, they kind of talk about it in that opening scene. I mean, I'm glad you mentioned the opening scene of the movie in the strip club earlier, because to me, that's just such a great way to set up this movie. I mean, you meet the 2 characters, the 2 shady guys. You meet Jerry, and then the first exchange between them is, sorry, I thought it was 7:30. I thought it was 8:30. And then that awkwardness is immediate right from the start. And he's, you know, it's very simple. Hey man, sorry, I need some money. My wife's dad has it. I need you to kidnap her for me. Like, that's the entire movie right there. And to me, that's all it is. We don't really, doesn't necessarily matter how he's in in the hole. The fact that he's in the hole and he needs the money, we kind of buy in and we're on for the ride from then on.
I agree, but what I would say is that I think it is a very strong choice to not tell us why he needs the money, because I think by doing that, the film refuses him any sympathy.
That's a good point. That's a great point. It's the golden briefcase of this movie, right? It's
right.
Doesn't if we find out why, I mean, you're right. He could be in the whole $1 million for some even shadier stuff than this.
Right.
We just don't know. And maybe
if he was like
he was in the whole $1 million because he donated it all to charity, then we'd all be like, oh, it's okay then.
But even if he was
we're even now, right?
Yeah, but
exactly. A lot of kids in Africa were fed because of this, so we're good.
But even if he was a degenerate gambler, I think even then we would, one could argue like, oh, he's, has a mental illness, he can't help it, or something like that. But I think that by not telling us, we're able to make that stronger moral statement that he just fucked up.
That's interesting.
I think
wonder
there's
what it is about. Yeah, what is it about the human that it's like when we have the reason why, when we have like a sort of psychoanalytic reason, right? Like, oh, they were abused as a child, or they experienced their parents' death as a child, that elicits the response. But if you're like, no, this person's just an asshole, but you don't have that backstory, why that doesn't? I wonder, is it just because it doesn't connect us to their story? Yeah, it doesn't broaden out the empathic circle, you think, Claire?
I mean, yeah, I think it's literally that if we can identify things about our own experience that are similar, we automatically kind of lean towards empathy, even if we don't want to. And so when you get the backstory, even if it's something you haven't experienced, maybe more often than not, someone who has, or there's a little bit of that human connection that's, definitionally empathy, that you just wouldn't and couldn't get without the backstory. So I think that's a great thing to bring up. They don't want us to have empathy. Oh, but I remembered a time. So I was so like, hey guys, I never supported Jerry. Jerry sucks. I want him dead. And then I just remembered a moment where I did feel bad for Jerry. And it was the moment when he was conning that couple with the rust-proof seal on the car.
You don't want that seal. You're gonna get oxidation.
Yeah. I felt that, and this is just because William H. Macy's an incredible actor, and God, his face looked like a puppy that was being kicked.
Yes.
Like it was his face. Why is he such a good actor? But when I was watching him,
it's called practical aesthetics. That's his acting approach that he and his wife and David Mamet developed. So for acting students out there, check it out. Practical aesthetics. It's about being real and shit. Sorry, Claire, go ahead.
Okay, well, that's why he's such a good actor. Yeah, but it was funny. He just looked so miserable about conning this couple at the same time as he's doing something really terrible. So watching him, like in one of the, I mean, of course, he gets his wife kidnapped, but in one of the moments in the film where he is up in somebody's face, personally causing them distress, that's one of the moments where I felt the most empathy for him. And it was just because of how sad he looked. And how sad he looked, I think, kind of gave the impression that he didn't want to be doing this, that he felt like he didn't have a choice, that there was some reason that it was beyond his control to con this couple, that this was something he was forced into doing, but really, he's a good person and he doesn't want to be doing this. And if you think about that for more than like 2 seconds, it's bullshit. But that's what was it, practical aesthetics?
Yeah.
It got me to believe. It got me there. It was the one moment where I felt sorry for Jerry.
Yeah, sometimes it's referred to now as the Atlantic method because they started a theater school in New York called the Atlantic Theater School, or the Atlantic Theater Company, and then they have the Atlantic Theater School. But yeah, him, his wife, and David Mamet, it's their anti-method approach to acting that's all about making genuine, authentic connections with the other person and not with the character. So they say that there is no such thing as character. All it is lines on a page. And you're just supposed to make an authentic human connection with the actual other human in front of you. And they have all these approaches to it. So it's really interesting.
So, Claire, I'm really glad you brought up that scene at the beginning with that $500 sealant, because this is the first time I watched this movie, and I kind of realized this motif, I guess we can call it. And there's a lot of emphasis on the concept and word of deals. So Jerry is constantly saying, "This is my deal," and he says, "We have to play ball here. This is the deal." And then at the beginning, we see that Jerry cons someone out of a deal, and he was lying. He's always saying, "There's no rough stuff type of deal." And then when Carl calls him, he said, "Now we had a deal here. A deal's a deal." And then Carl's like, "Is it, Jerry? Ask those 3 poor souls up in Brainerd if a deal's a deal. Ask them." And I don't really think there's any greater significance to this, but I do find it interesting that at the beginning of the movie, the first thing we see William H. Macy do is conning someone out of a deal, and then tragically the deal that he made ends up falling apart in the most tragic way possible.
There is a really interesting political economy that cuts through the Coen Brothers films, and we don't have the time to get into it now, but I think that there is a really interesting reflection on a sort of socioeconomic critique of capitalism that cuts through all of this. That, I mean, because money factors so heavily in the plots, but it's not like the way that we think of capitalism as being sort of like 2 individuals that enter into a contract and they suspend, or I'm sorry, and they're both seeking their self-interests, and so they make this contract, and that's the deal, right? And so maybe that they're kind of confounding this because instead of it taking place at the level of the market, it's taking place at the black market or the gray market, right? It's something that's underneath the surface, and I don't know. I don't really have any formed thoughts on it, but it does seem to be pretty apparent.
Yeah, I guess I would probably say that it's less a critique of capitalism and more just that the Coen brothers are huge cinephiles and they love to play with the MacGuffin of the bag of money.
Oh, you think?
Yeah.
Mm.
Yeah, they Return to the Well with No Country, right?
No Country, even The Big Lebowski.
Right. That's The Ringer.
Right.
The Ringer.
Yeah.
So good. So great. I wanted to ask Claire something.
Go ahead.
Do you think seeing The Big Lebowski or the other Coen movies might have affected your perception or given you an impression of what you thought you were going to get with this? Because I saw this before I saw Lebowski, before I saw any of the other films. Yeah, I think, like you said earlier, I saw Raising Arizona. Maybe it was the only movie I'd seen before this one. So to me, this is more of a progression up to films like Lebowski, and you sort of understand them more because of knowing where they came from. Does that make sense? So
Yeah.
Did that affect you because you had seen all their other films?
Absolutely. And I'm really glad you brought that up. So when I take notes, it's kind of stream of consciousness. And I have at the top of my notes, when the credits are showing up at the beginning, "Oh yeah, Frances McDormand and Buscemi, William H. Macy, man, I know exactly what kind of film this is going to be." Like verbatim on my notes.
I love it.
So actually that's a great point. I did think that I was going to see the Frances McDormand from Burn After Reading,
Right.
and the Buscemi from, I mean, that's not even Coen Brothers, Buscemi from anything Buscemi does. But I had all of these other Coen Brothers movies swirling in my head, and so I guess I was expecting something that Fargo didn't deliver on, and Fargo maybe was never supposed to deliver on that, but because I felt like it was disappointing. So that's a really, really good insight. Thank you for bringing that up.
All right, so a couple other things I want to bring up, one of which is one of the characters that we don't see very often, but I think is handled really well, is Scotty, the kid. I think that the way that he's not shown really paints him very effectively as a victim caught in the crossfire, just deeply tragic. So some of my favorite parts are when they're talking about Scotty. So the look on Jerry's face when Stan Grossman asks him how Scotty's doing, you can just tell, and maybe this is more of William H. Macy's amazing acting style, but you could just tell that he hadn't even thought about Scotty. And then my favorite thing is that at the end of the movie, Scotty is off screen. He's saying like, "Dad, did you call Stan Grossman? Dad, is everything okay?" And I love how he's off screen. I think that's so effective in painting him as the victim that wasn't even taken into consideration.
Yeah, I completely agree with that assessment.
I didn't take him into consideration.
It's funny because, I mean, think of it from Jerry's perspective, right? If this all goes to plan, everything's fine, right? His wife's kidnapped for a few days by quote unquote unknown guys that we have nothing to do with. He gets his money. His wife is returned. He quits his job. He opens up this new business. Everything's fine. So, I mean, that scene when he has to go into Scotty's room and he's like, these guys, they just want money. Everything's going to be fine. They're not going to hurt mom. You know, like this whole thing, he's so confident that this plan's going to work out for him. And it's not until he realizes that it's gone awry that he has to, you know, that scene with William H. Macy rehearsing how he's going to tell the dad, you know, it's Gene. Oh, geez, it's Gene. He's like rehearsing how he's.
Oh, yeah. Wade Gustafson, please.
Too. But yeah, to him, he's still so confident. You know, over half the movie, he thinks this is all going to work out in the end. Like he's in denial that this is not working out because, you know, his mechanic vouched for a guy or whatever.
It's amazing how calloused he is, that he thinks that there won't be long-term traumatic consequences. Like, yeah, okay, let's say it does go to plan. Let's say everything works out fine. His wife is going to be scarred for life. His child is going to be scarred for life. Like, yeah, maybe he gets out of his financial debt, but it's amazing to think the depth of what is that insincerity that he exhibits.
He's twisted, man.
Yeah, but he's so nice about it.
Yeah. Oh yeah, real good now.
So the spectrum of niceness is something that I wanted to come back to for a minute, because not everyone in the film is Minnesota nice. And on one hand, you know, we see the two guys like Tall Blondie and, you know, Steve Buscemi, who I love that everyone kept describing him as just kind of funny looking, you know, like not in a real specific way, just generally kind of funny looking. That was Irish. That wasn't even Minnesota. I don't even know what that was. So there's them, but they're who even knows where they're from. But we also have the father-in-law who, Mr. What is it? It's not Gunderson. Gunderson's Marge Gunderson.
Gustafson. Yeah.
Gustafson. They all have Scandinavian last names. Mr. Gustafson, he is not Minnesota nice, and he is not playing around. And you also see, and this I'm sure has to do with a lot of family dynamics and whatnot, but Jerry is really kind of cowed under this, you know, very intimidating father-in-law authority figure. And you also see this clicked with me when I was watching it when Steve Buscemi has to hand over his $4 to the guy at the parking lot, and he yells at him, "What, you think you're some kind of authority figure? You think because of your uniform you're an authority figure?" And there's this real, I think, kind of tension of masculinity that's working against this Minnesota nice. So the men, like Jerry, I'm mostly thinking of Jerry, but then, you know, beyond that, Marge, who's not a man and who I think we could argue exemplifies like almost weirdly specific femininity in a lot of ways. There's that niceness played against the like bravado and desperate need for authority of the people who are not nice. So I haven't really fully teased out what that means, or even if it was, I mean, I'm sure it was intentional to some degree. But yeah, where there isn't Minnesota nice, there's this really over the top kind of need for masculine authority. And I thought that was interesting where I noted it happening in the film. And it happens with a few different characters.
And this is where I think it fits in maybe with what I called earlier the awkwardness of money. Because so the older gentleman, he's not nice, but he's also the rich one. Jerry doesn't get nice when he is under financial pressure. Steve Buscemi and the other dude, they're not nice because they're just like hitmen, basically. They're just like hired guns, right? So again, it's about this money.
Well, and one kills the other one over splitting a car.
Exactly. And then, of course, when you have the juxtapose that to the sincerity at the end in the car when Frances McDormand is giving her little soliloquy about money, I think that maybe what you're talking about, Claire, too, also fits because I don't think that the masculinity that you're talking about is separate from the awkwardness of money. I think they infuse one another. And even though, I don't want to get too like lefty here, as I am somewhat want to do,
Get lefty, Austin. Do it.
I
Don't
do
do
think
it.
that the implicit that the implicit critique of capitalism, let's say the implicit critique of crony capitalism to make our libertarian friends and more conservative friends happy, is that unfettered, unchecked greed for money does create this weird social tension, and it does then delude that niceness that would otherwise exist among normal middle class people, the salt of the earth middle class people who, yeah, of course they have financial pressures, but they're not so consumed by it. They're consumed by the other things, the important things, right? They're, like Claire said at the beginning, they're consumed by family and love and relationships and things like that. And so that niceness covers over the greedy niceness, or maybe the greediness is what kind of destroys the middle class niceness of the Midwest. Something along those lines.
So I'm glad that Claire brought up Wade, because I actually want to pose a question to you guys. So earlier, Kent said that, yeah, the message of the movie is that there's more to life than just a little bit of money, and the people that overemphasize the importance of money are, the ones that kind of get put in the ground. Where does Wade, the father-in-law, he too seem to be too interested in money? Now, granted, I think if we look at the movie, we can say that even if he said, sure, Jerry, take the money, deliver it, it still would have went wrong because Gaer's character kills the wife anyway. But I think that same moral lens that we judge Jerry through, we can also judge Wade through. Do you guys agree, disagree?
In what way?
Well, because Wade is saying, oh, $1 million, that's a lot of money. And like he's so fixated. He's more fixated on the money than he is his daughter.
Yeah, his unwillingness to give up the briefcase is what ends up getting him shot, right?
Yeah.
He's like, no Claire, or no Gene, no money, right? And he's like, that's not the deal. He's like, I don't care. No Gene, no money. I'm not giving up $1 million unless I know for a fact that I'm going to get my daughter, right?
And he says,
Did you just confuse me with the dead wife?
Oh, did he say Claire?
Yeah, he did.
Gene.
I'm sorry. It's Gene. Sorry.
But yeah, like over and over.
A lot of names flying at me.
Wade always says, $1 million, that's a lot of money.
Right.
Over and over.
Well, his whole identity is structured around money, right? Like even when we first are introduced to him, it's through Jerry talking about how he's rich. And then the first scene that we meet him, it's when he's going to stay for dinner, and then he and Jerry talk, and the thing that Wade says is, don't worry, Gene and Scotty, they're taken care of. They don't have to worry. And so again, his identity is just simply as the rich guy.
Well,
that's how he's portrayed.
Yeah, I also think that one of the best ways to introduce a character is the introduction of Wade. We see the first shot of him. It's a low-angle shot with a wide lens as he watches sports. He's gripping his fist as the sports thing is going on. It so efficiently and precisely establishes him as like the alpha patriarch. It's just tech. Yeah, I know, but it's just technique really nailing that down.
Oh yeah, I mean these guys, they're masterful filmmakers.
Yeah.
They can create a world through not just at the level of like concepts and ideas, because I actually think they're less explicitly conceptual than, say, someone like is it Alex Garland, who wrote Annihilation and like Ex Machina, who he seems to be, to me, like he tries too much at the stage of the designing principle and at the conceptual, and then he tries to make a story fit that, right? He's like, oh, I want to explore post-humanism, and so I'm going to make a movie about that. That's cool. Whereas I think they just want to tell stories about interesting people, but because they're so philosophically attuned, that there's a richness that undercuts their plots. And so they're just very good at creating this world at the level of character and at the level of the human that explores these weird social concepts, but does so in a way that's almost tangential.
Yeah.
Jared, I had totally forgotten about the introductory scene where the low angle on Wade as he's watching sports. I had 100% forgotten about that, but that's so perfect. That's such a good example.
Yeah. Cool. Well, guys, we're going over time. We're going to have to move on to the mailbag. So I've got some questions picked out. This one's fun. This is called Get Out Plot Hole from Tony. He says, you guys do a phenomenal job on your podcast, thank you. And I know it's a bit late, but I think I found a plot hole in the movie. How does Chris get the cotton in his ears if his hands are tied to the chair? I don't have an answer for that, although it is fun in my mind trying to think of him awkwardly, like, leaning his head down, trying to get it in there. But Anyone got some theories?
Well, I mean, somehow he has to get his hand free anyway. Even if he did like lean down and put the cotton in his ear, eventually he has to get his hands free. So the question is how the fuck does he get his hands free? And I do remember thinking this, I think because I've seen the film maybe like 3 or 4 times, and I do remember thinking this, and then I kind of was like, nah, just ignore it, just stay with it.
The only explanation I can think of is that it's like a big pad, right? Like it's like a awkward cotton-filled pad that he's got his hand on. Like maybe he takes out so much cotton that he gets enough slack in his wrist to slide his wrist out and then put it in, and then put his hand back into the chair to create the illusion that everything's fine.
There we go.
All
right.
I have no idea though.
Yes.
Maybe that is a plot.
I like it. We'll take it.
All right, this next question is from Nate. This is about the cabin in the woods. He said, I always thought that the the gods of the old world represented the producers and studios. If the director, writer, production staff doesn't complete the checklist with all these tropes, then the studio will destroy the movie by not allowing it to be distributed. Do you guys agree with this meta reading? I know Claire, you love the movie, right? You want to weigh in?
I love the movie. I hadn't thought about it like that before, but just from seeing everything else Joss Whedon's ever done, he loves his deep mythology so much. The original or the first evil from Buffy and all of the crazy gods and demons from Angel and whatnot. I feel like with a Joss Whedon movie, he really just is giving you the old gods. I mean, that's not to say they couldn't have a little bit of metaphor in them, but I think he really just wants to hit you on like, there's some old like Cthulhu ass shit down there, and it's gonna come for you if you don't sacrifice people the right way.
See, I agree with Claire. Sorry, keep going.
No, I'm happy you agree with me.
No, I'm saying, yeah, but like my I guess because I didn't think that the old ones really represented anything other than like Lovecraftian cosmic horror, then the message kind of falls a little bit flat. But we don't have to get into that. But I agree with what Claire is saying. Austin, do you have any thoughts?
I have no thoughts. I will defer. I like listening sometimes, even though I talk too much.
Okay.
I will say, Claire, we can bag on Jared. He's never seen Buffy.
I've seen the movie. I've seen the movie a long time ago.
Movie, that's completely different. It's a whole different thing. It's
Although
not
it was
even
written,
close.
it was written by Joss Whedon. It was just completely distorted.
It's completely different. It shares. Watch the damn series.
Well, would you have rather me have not seen the movie?
I watched the movie after I finished all 7 seasons of the series. The movie's okay.
I love the movie.
It's okay.
All right.
I love it so much.
Here's one last one from Max. He says, as far as Cabin in the Woods, I don't see it as a direct criticism or a send-up of horror movies or the filmmakers who make them. If the teens are the meta cast, the control room are the filmmakers. They are responsible for the tropes and bad decisions, making it in the interest of appeasing the gods or audience. It's not a criticism of the filmmakers, but the audience they are playing to. We, like Whedon and Goddard, love horror movies, but perhaps unlike them, don't demand enough of the genre. Oh, Babadook didn't have enough monster? It Follows bores you? Really? You, audience, are God. Act accordingly. I think this kind of went in line of how I was tempted to read the movie, but no, I think Max. Right. I think Max has a very good reading of it. I'm down with that. Got nothing more to say than that.
Yeah. No. Yeah. I mean, you and Carrie, I think, talked quite a bit about the control room as being the writers and Sigourney Weaver as being the director. And yeah, I mean, I think that there's an element of that's interesting and that we're supposed to think about that. But for me, it's just, I think I'm so entranced by like the mythological and the psychoanalytic readings of the film that it's hard for me to even see that level of it as primary. Not that it's not that it's wrong. I think all of these levels of analysis have import and they kind of all infuse one another. It's just my mind just doesn't go there for whatever reason.
Cool. All right, well, that's going to wrap it up for today. I want to thank our special guest, Kent, from the Mad About Movies podcast. Thanks for joining us, Kent.
Had a great time. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, so
thanks,
guys,
dude.
just want to remind you guys, check out Kent's podcast. It is Mad About Movies. You can find it on iTunes and all that fun stuff. And as for everybody, where can we find you on the internet?
I'm on Twitter at Wisecrack Claire.
And Austin?
Yeah, Austin_Hayden. Hit me up on Twitter and we can fight about philosophy and shit.
And Kent?
You can find me on Twitter at Kent Garrison, and our show is at Mad About Movies on Twitter as well.
Yeah, I recommend you guys check out their latest episode on Ready Player One for those of you who have seen it.
Oh, thanks, man.
Yeah, absolutely. So I want to give one last shout out to say if you guys are interested and if you like what we do and you want to be more engaged with us and you want to get a peek at our process and our research, definitely hit up wisecrackplus.com. I want to thank all my guests, and that about does it for today. We'll see you next time. Bye-bye.